And as the current economic woes of the country continue to bite hard, the economic management team of the country, a crack team of experts made up of the vice president and elite ministers, have been summoned to a crunch meeting to explore the options on the table. This is what we are discussing today. What are the main options available to us as the fuel and the Cedi crisis continue to hit hard at virtually every sector of this country? Now, amidst the growing depreciation of the cedi, there is currently a crunch meeting ongoing by the economic management team. The agenda, one, to make sure they fix the current economic problems the country is facing. This has been happening for some time now. Ahead of this, though, we've been told that there's a cabinet meeting which is supposed to propose solutions on the table. We even know that at the Bank of Ghana's monetary policy level, an MPC meeting has been happening for a couple of days now. Now, after this important economic management meeting, we understand all of them will be moving to Peduase Lodge, where cabinet will be making major, far-reaching decisions on the economy of this country, an economy that's been recently battered by recent happenings. Let me first get to the phone lines, and I appreciate how important this meeting is. Let's go to the University of Ghana, to the Economics Department. Dr. Priscilla Chumesi Bafo is an economist there and a senior lecturer. Doc, you're welcome to our front.
Thank you very much, Raymond, and good evening to your listeners and viewers.
For government, this is the make or break time to make the most important decisions to save or destroy the economy of the country. Hopefully, they will save it. But to you, what are your expectations coming out of such a meeting?
Thanks once again, Raymond. I believe that these are quite difficult times for anybody steering the economic affairs of this country because of the happenings in recent times. In Ghana, we are dealing with significant depreciation of the currency, which we were expecting to improve, but it appears the raging war in Russia and Ukraine is also having its toll on fuel prices with important effect on the exchange rate. So for me, we are looking at it in two different angles. On the monetary side, we are expecting that the Monetary Policy Committee would come up with some tightening measures. So, for example, to control the rate of inflation, 15.7% is the highest we have had since October 2016. So indeed, we expect that they'll come out with policies, for example, to increase the prime rate to try to control the demand pressures that are happening on that side. On the fiscal, that is the government side, we expect that, yes, something ought to be done. So, for example, we know that government is in a very tight fiscal space because of our inability to generate enough revenue. And so there is always the call for government to be innovative, to widen the tax net. That is the argument for the e-levy, which comes with a lot of issues because of probably its negative effects it could have on our ability to digitize and move towards a more digitized economy where we are moving away from cash. So indeed, we expect that something would happen. And on the back of high prices of crude oil and the prices of fuel on our market, we would expect that something would happen in the form of probably removal of some of the levies and taxes that are on the fuel prices to cushion the ordinary Ghanaian. So in doing this on one breath, we expect that government will cushion the Ghanaian because of the hardship we are currently facing. But government, on the other hand, also has a very tight budget. So how does it work? Government would approach the IMF only when we are having significant challenges with our balance of payment position. At the moment, as it stands, based on reported reserves by the Bank of Ghana, we don't see a dire situation there. But we are sort of going there in the sense that the depreciation of the currency does not seem to be taking a better turn yet, particularly on the back that, recently, I think a day or two, the U.S. Federal Reserve, for example, is increasing its interest rate. And that could have another significant negative shock because people would want to move into the U.S. market to invest, and that could further deteriorate the depreciating currency we are facing. So yes, in a nutshell, these are some of the prospects and the things that we expect the Monetary Policy Committee and Cabinet to come up with measures to try to steer the affairs of the economy in these turbulent times.
Is it too little, too late, whichever policies, direction, be it on monetary or fiscal level, or a combination of both that was be taken, whichever decision that's likely to be taken now, would it be too little, too late, as some are already suggesting?
It's a tough call to make. I don't know how to put it. Too little, too late. I believe that the intervention is timely. It is about time, because when you look at the fuel price, for example, it's been going up consistently, and it is hitting very concerning levels. And these have implications on the price of food, on the price of transportation. Fuel touches the core of society. So in that sense, if nothing is done, then it means that our whole argument of being able to manage the inflation and, for that matter, presenting some stability in our economy will be thrown out of gear. So indeed, I would say that we need some interventions. But as to the timely nature, I believe that policymakers were also watching the space to see if things could improve. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be happening because of probably a lot of external factors that are also at play. Like I indicated, we don't see an end in sight in the war that is leading to hikes in fuel prices. The U.S. economy is also increasing its interest rates. So to a large extent, most of the challenges, and remember, we are also coming out of a pandemic, and so it was a very tough time for anybody to be in a policy and making decisions. But I believe that they will take the right decisions. And for me, the impact really of any policy that would come up would be one that should cushion those at the bottom, the low-income earners. How are they able, how is policy going to be able to cushion them in terms of us managing this? Because to a large extent, most of the challenges that we are faced are external at the moment, really. The
options, though, and first, we're given the indication by the finance minister and others that going to the IMF for, be it an extended credit facility or whichever program that's likely to help us out, is out of the question. However, the indication we are being given today from the very staples of Gabi Asare-Ochidako is that everything is on the table, be it the IMF, e-levy, or even a combination of both. From where you sit, which one will be the savior, or if you like, the panacea to our current steaming difficulties?
That's a tough one to call, Raymond, but I'll say that yes. So, for example, our economy is moving fast on the pace of digitalization. So, for me, any tax initiative that tries to tackle people marketing things, doing business online is a good initiative. But targeting mobile money really is the main issue that we have had as, academics, because when you look at the data and what has happened in other African countries, it appears that this kind of taxation is a bit retrogressive in nature. And so going back to the myth, and sometimes it is worrying why we have politicized an attempt to get some sort of bailout from the IMF. Our economy is a developing economy, and shocks are bound to happen. So in that sense, if push comes to shove and we need to go, and I indicated that going to the IMF, we will go there basically for policy credibility. You know that, remember in 2016 or 17, we went to the IMF for policy credibility because at the time we could not maintain our BOP position. In that sense, yes, we have some reserves at the moment, but looking at the significant rate the depreciation of the currency is going, I think as of last week it was around 20%. It's quite worrying. So I believe that the Bank of Ghana would be using the reserves available to it to be able to cushion the demand that is coming, that is leading to the significant depreciation. And if that reserve consistently dwindles down, then it means that we would with nothing, and we wouldn't have a choice than to go to the IMF for support, because remember, based on the recent downgrade of the economy as well, the external market is basically not available. And then you see that government is in a fix to borrow also from the domestic market, and that is also problematic in terms of the fact that we need the investment. So indeed, I mean, government could come up if the e-levy is, what do we call it? They tweak things here and there, and probably not lay too much emphasis on mobile money and, for example, target online transactions. I've seen the GRA recently launch a program where they are targeting people doing business on YouTube, Google, Facebook, and that. Those are great initiatives because that is where the world is moving to, and our revenue mobilization must keep pace with those options. But indeed, I mean, it is either a combination of both, or I don't see anything significantly wrong if, because of the negative shocks of the pandemic and the hikes in fuel prices, Ghana ought to go and support from. Why not?
I guess we have to leave it off here, and I'm grateful because you left your class to join us for this conversation. Dr. Priscilla Chumesibafor, I appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you very much, Raymond. It's a pleasure.
Many thanks to you. The conversation started with an evaluation of what's currently happening. As we speak, the economic management team of the country are top government officials whose responsibility is to manage the economy, chaired by the vice president, is in a crunch meeting. This meeting is supposed to feed into another one, a bigger one of cabinet that will decide the future of this country. Already, we know that the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana, dealing with monetary policy, really also have been holding significant meetings, a meeting pushed forward because of what's currently happening, the fuel and the Cedi crisis on our hands. The most important conversations of what's supposed to be happening in this meeting is our focus. Will they fix the mess, or we have to deal with some other problems differently? Now, going to Zoom now, and joining us from the USA is a former finance minister who's been there at this point where it looked like all was not working in the country way back in 2014, going into 2015. The former minister I'm talking about is Cedi Crisis. You're welcome, sir, to UPfront.
Thank you very much, Raymond. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you perfectly. I hope you are in good health at this time.
Yeah, by His grace.
It is interesting you are far away outside the shores of this country, where we have a crunch meeting on our hands, seeking to determine the future of the economy. First, you have been both a member of the economic management team and also a cabinet. I'm not asking you to unveil to us whatever happens there, but at such meetings, how is it panning out? What do we do? What happens at such meetings? How are decisions taken? And how do we, the Republic of Ghana, get to know of the outcome?
Well, thank you very much. You will get to know the outcome ultimately. And remember that, let me begin with the budget. The budget is presented by the Minister for Finance, but it is presented on the authority of the President, because it is the President who is required to present the budget to Parliament. So what that the Minister for Finance does. So if you listen carefully to the introduction, it's always, Mr. Speaker, I wish to present the blah, 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 economic policy on the authority of the West to that effect. And cabinet is the ultimate. We have had a situation in Ghana where even though presidents have had their, prerogative, even under the constitution, they normally take them to cabinet. So cabinet decides a lot. So we can say that we are at the ultimate, and whatever comes out would have had the blessing of cabinet. The elements that will be legislative, for example, is only parliament that can vary the budget, and we are talking fundamentally about a budget that is not holding. So those elements, including the adjustments to taxes and others, virtually a supplementary budget, may have to go to parliament statement. If you recall, in 2013, 2015, when crude oil prices fell sharply, we went to parliament, cabinet parliament, with yeah. And it is the economic management team, if the fiscal council is still working, and others who provide the input, that's the relevance. So the Minister of Finance works with the economic management team where other sector ministers and others are involved, to bring their input, because whatever decision is made, let's take, oil, weather prices, which benefits the budget, by the way, because the money through the Petroleum Revenue Management Act will go up, but then it punishes at the pump. This involves the Minister for Energy, definitely, and its agencies. So that's the essence of, the interplay that you are saying. But let me just, I appreciate Dr. Chumesi's
briefly, forgive me, I'll go into that much detail, forgive me. The point, however, is what is that black box at the economic management team? Now, whose views and opinion holds sway there? Is it the chairman, who is the vice president, or the finance minister, who is the person who is basically managing the economy? So who is supremo at the economic management team?
It's chaired by the vice president. So there's no question, who is the supremo.
Okay.
Unless, and I don't think it has changed.
Okay.
For a very long time, even as a technocrat before I became minister, working at Ministry of Finance, it's always been the vice president who chairs the economic management team, and no other person chairs it.
Now, I'm asking this question because recently there was a lot of pressure on the vice president to come out and speak on the matters of importance in this country. Others suggested that pressure should be mounted rather on the finance minister, because in a sense, he's the one in charge of our economy anyway. Is it true?
Well,
you've been there.
It's cabinet. There is no policy which the Minister for Finance, presents if it doesn't even require legislative, approval, which, on the minister's own, goes public, with it. So the minister is the face of the economy, yes. The minister takes responsibility for much of, policies, because they are coming out of the Ministry of Finance. But when you talk about the approving authority, it's always cabinet. We have an executive, we have an executive, a parliament, and the judiciary, the legislature, and they play their roles. Even if the decision is taken, as I said, and it requires, the parliamentary approval, then it goes there. And even if, remember, if parliament takes a decision and even a citizen disagrees with it, as we have had with the DACF, and others, they go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, then interprets the Constitution and tells us, precisely. So I think the rules are well defined, by the, by the Constitution, foremost, from our past experience. So there are very clear lines on these issues. I don't think we have a confusion in terms of hierarchy in decision making.
Now, it's important, though, I ask you
but sorry, if I may.
Yes,
I believe that the vice president is let's broaden the conversation. The vice president chairs, yes. The minister for responsibility takes responsibility for economic policy. But remember, the vice president in the past has also made, as a candidate, made, a lot of, candid and very frank, criticisms of the past government and going forward what is expected, what they expect to do. So I think it may be in that context, that, the public is also talking to the vice president. Yeah.
Okay, now the question that I'm asking you now is about the pressure that comes with this job. During the period around this time and when we were in a similar situation in 2015, there were calls, and I'm not sure you might not have, maybe you might not have heard them, for you to be removed as finance minister. There are similar calls today for the current finance minister to be removed. The question I'm asking you is whether they are, regardless of the calls on you previously, legitimate calls on the finance minister to be changed to save the ailing economy.
Let me just say that we're in a democracy, and the public are allowed to present their views.
No, I'm asking you for an opinion on this one. Yeah. I'm asking your opinion on whether or not we should remove the current finance minister for not being able to get us out of these current difficulties early enough.
Even in my position, I do not know the details of every policy and how they are initiated in the Ministry of Finance. So it will be very bold and I believe unfair for me, to be making, pronouncing on such a call.
Were the calls on you justified? Were the calls during your time on you justified?
Personally, no, because I think that you can see some of the things, the initiatives, we may come to them. For example, what happens, when you are going to face, look, you cannot run an economy for 4 years, right? Without one crisis or the other. So we started preparing for those things from Professor Mercy's time, the Stabilization Fund. Today we are talking about, I heard you talk about crude oil prices and their effect at the pump. We started a strategic stock levy. We are talking about debt overruns and the rest. Yeah, we had a habit of just refinancing and borrowing, paying only interest. We said this is not benefiting the country. So we started a sinking fund, so that, and there are practical, successes which I can point to. For example,
I get you. So,
yes,
I'll come back to some more detail on this.
Yes.
But you are basically saying that they were not justified at the time.
No, I'm saying that, no, I'm leaving the public again to make the assessment because now we know the record. We can compare. We've shown our record for the last 4 years compared to our record for the 4 years, which we call the scorecard. And much of the initiatives are now being understood, including infrastructure fund, sinking fund, stabilization fund. Many of them are constitutional, by the way, and were not implemented since 1992. How do you manage a crisis? We can come to those. So I'm saying that, yes, with hindsight, are the same people who were making the call, were they justified or not? I leave it to the public.
Now, let me bring in Joe Jackson. He's a chartered economist, and he's actually with Dillis Finance too. Mr. Jackson, you're welcome to UPfront.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and it's good to see Honorable Tekbe. Hello, sir. Good to see you.
Wonderful.
Hello, Joe. Yeah.
Now,
nice to meet you.
The direct question I have for you, Mr. Jackson, is this the right time for such a crunch meeting of the economic management team ahead of a cabinet meeting on perhaps the same agenda when the NPC has also been meeting for a couple of days now? Is this perhaps the most important time to do this, or regardless of what happened, it will be too little, too late?
First of all, we've got to acknowledge that this is happening in view of the recent developments, the dive in the value of the Cedi, the prices that are taking a hike across board, and all the challenges that we are facing. And they've come to a head. So literally, there's a crisis on. So meetings will be held back to back, etc. I don't think there's any issue of the right time or the wrong time.
Okay.
The only issue, if it addresses or starts to mitigate some of the challenges that we are facing at the moment.
Maybe that's the question I'm moving on to. What are your expectations that after this meeting, we'll have a clear-cut direction about where the state is going, what is going to happen, and exactly how we intend to arrest and reverse the current difficulties. Are those your expectations?
First of all, I don't think the current challenges can be arrested like that. And so one meeting and we come back and everything is okay and everything is fine. Some of the problems we face are structural. Some of the problems we face didn't happen overnight, even though the effects are being felt now. But what we expect is a bold direction, hard decisions taken, and the attempt to seek consensus and to lead out of the present crisis. What we need is bold decisions, hard decisions, consensus, and leadership.
I see.
Right? The challenges are clear. The fact that they're having all these meetings is acknowledgement that things are nowhere near where they should be and that we are in a crisis.
Now, there's a big question, though, and I'll bring the Honorable Secretary into this conversation too. First, we were told clearly that going to the IMF was off the table. It was not being considered, and it's not an option for us. Today, the indication from Mr. Gabi Asaro Chidako is that this is still up for debate, and the people of this republic, including the meetings that we are looking at now, will put going to the IMF on the table as the options. Are we doing IMF or e-levy or both? Maybe I ask you that question. If you sit where we sit today, is it a good move that maybe IMF is back on the table? And what options do you think we should consider going forward? Mr. Tekpe.
We have been debating this for some time now. Look, the simple question is, what is the alternative? If there is an alternative, please present it.
E-levy.
You know, and let me tie in with
with respect, e-levy is pretty clear on this one. Government has said e-levy is an alternative for us.
The e-levy is not the panacea for everything that is being presented. And let me give you two reasons. First of all, it is a distortion of our tax structure. Second is taxing savings, which is my basic and fundamental opposition to it. It tells you how dire the situation is for us to contemplate. Ghana, even in African context, let alone globally, wanting to tax savings? No, it's never done. Then secondly, it is exaggerated. I urge you to look at the appendix to the budget. The projections, you know, for e-levy are there for the next 3 years, in fact, next 4 years. 7 billion this year, next year is around the same 8 billion, then it goes to 9 billion, and the uppermost by 2025 is 10 billion. Is that, you know, what is going to resolve the fact that we cannot, you know, we have to borrow to pay our debts, and then even the interest on that debt, if you pay it after paying compensation, is not enough? Is that the solution to it? Are we talking, if you look at our refinancing, is it a question of 7 billion? The fact that salaries are in arrears, the fact that contractors have not been paid, I beg to differ. The situation is much bigger.
With respect, would it not sound hypocritical that you who has been to this particular position before, there was some time in our future, I remember in 2015 when we introduced ESLA, it was because we also needed revenue and we needed to push it. People opposed it, but it was still pushed ahead, and up to today, ESLA is still on our table. Would it not be problematic? Yes.
ESLA, look, let's not, you know, ESLA was to last 3 to 5 years, and we started the implementation of ESLA. That's the first point.
Yeah.
Today, we didn't turn ESLA into a loan, into a bond.
Okay.
We negotiated directly with the banks, right? We estimated the liability, which was acknowledged in 2017, that within 3 to 5 years, it can settle the energy sector debt, it can settle the arrears owed to contractors.
My only question here is that
principle,
for a government, for a finance minister that took ESLA to the Parliament of the Republic of Ghana, your opposition to current tax policies is not problematic.
I'm opposing it on a matter of principle. I just said it. Would you want your savings to be taxed? That's the question I'm asking.
Okay.
We tax income, we tax consumption. Secondly, we have had a tradition since Dr. Bochwe's era of imposing temporary taxes when we have, you know, issues. We either call them fiscal stabilization or national stabilization on income tax, or temporary import duty. We always put a sunset clause on it. This is the only government which took those temporary taxes, including ESLA, which you are talking about, and made them permanent. And have added more levies to it. And even the e-levy, there's no sunset clause. It is just there, open-ended, just the way ESLA had been made open-ended and extended to 10 years and beyond on account of the bond being 10 years. But Raymond, let me go back to the IMF.
But do I get the impression from you?
It's for the benefit of our listeners.
Very good, very well. I get your point. I will leave you to make that point. But I was asking whether I get the impression from you that if you put a sunset clause on e-levy, you will support it.
I raised my fundamental objection.
I see. I get you.
If it's a sunset, if there's a sunset clause, it is a temporary tax because it's distortionary of the VAT and other taxes. 2, if the other temporary taxes that we impose, we didn't let go, even when we had 3 oil fields giving us much revenue, and we could have taken them off. If ESLA had been, if a sunset clause can be put on ESLA, which was to last 3 to 5 years, so that we can settle the depositors' funds and whatever as we acknowledge. These are some of the preconditions for which, look, if you are going to resolve the problem we have today, you have to tackle revenue, you have to tackle expenditure. And by the way, the problem is not just revenue. I listened to Professor Jumesi. There was no mention of expenditure. And let me tell you the reason why. If you look at the flagship, and it is not politically correct to talk about free SHS, right? But I said in 2017 that in its unfettered form, again, don't say I'm hypocritical because we had progressively free. Yeah. But I said in its unfettered form, there is no way in which even with 3 oil fields, we can support free SHS, right? And that even in the mighty US, secondary education is free, but it's day. Students are bused to school, they are fed once a day, right? Generally, nobody pays for boarding, nobody pays. There's no means testing, right? So we said it. Let's talk about expenditure. The reason I'm saying this, first of all, is remember, the first attempt to resolve free SHS financing and other initiatives was the Heritage Fund. The Heritage Fund, we went through that debate, if you remember.
Yes, the senior minister hinted at that. Yeah.
The second controversy, but for PIAC, that came in, was that we were virtually using all of oil revenue to support free SHS. Then if you go back to parliamentary documents, and they are public, you can go and look at them, every single bond that has been issued in the last 4 years, and I remember the 2019 bond, up to 2.2 billion Ghana cedis was used to support free SHS. If that is the trend from oil revenue to other revenues and everything, the capping, if you remember, the capping of other funds and others too. So our problem is expenditure because we have thrown all of these loans, oil revenue, levies and things at the expenditure, right? And still we are not getting, a resolution. So if you have a problem like this, as we have had in our structural adjustment programs, you look at everything. You need to refinance.
I get your point.
On a quick note, you see, you don't go to the IMF, just because it provides balance of payment support. You go to the IMF because when you go to the IMF and you present a program, right, the ratings agencies, the equity funds, and the rest, who are going to refinance, who are going to refinance your debt, right, which you cannot pay, are looking to the IMF for policy credibility. And by the way, it was not because we didn't have balance of payment, sufficient balance of payment. Yes, we always not have sufficient. Remember, we had the sinking fund, we had those who were optional, they were not statutory, which we could have swept, to meet some of those, requirements.
I get you.
Yes. So you need, and then you also need, when you have done that, the sister institution, which is the World Bank, the African Development Bank, to come and give you budget support.
Okay.
Right? So your budget support, which is a fiscal problem that is giving you the challenge. And by the way, let me make this disclosure, this point very well. Yes, traditionally we have given the IMF money to the Bank of Ghana. That's what the professor was talking about. But I can tell you on authority that the ECF loan that the Mahama administration, got from the IMF, remember the 918, million? Remember that it overlapped into the 6th and 7th revenue from 2017 to 2019. Mm-hmm. Part of that was used to support budget expenditure.
Okay.
We were using it exclusively for balance of payments. Secondly, the entire COVID loan of 1 billion, which many countries gave to their central banks, we got a waiver from the IMF board. Please read the report to apply it to the budget. And then the SDR, you can look at financing, which we got recently from the same IMF, did not all go exclusively to balance of payment. A substantial portion went into the budget. It was not shown as revenue, neither was the form of expenditure shown. It was buried in expenditure. And that is part of the problem we are having. This creative accounting which we have been doing, right? It was shown as a, so I think, with all due respect to the professor and academia, let us look at what has happened. Let's not take the narrative. What is the normal? I'm saying that IMF money significantly, even more than the World Bank, has gone to support this budget. And again, what is it paying for? Expenditure. Let me make another point, a final one. Let's also, apart from the accounting matters which I'm talking about, the World Bank has come to confirm what some of us have been saying for a very long time, that we had this situation we are talking about today before COVID. And so blaming almost everything on COVID was wrong. Right?
I get your point.
I need to bring it. Yes, the World Bank has said that our deficit is already, our arrears was about 5%. If you add it to the 11%, it gives you 16%. Which is what some of us were saying was a true deficit that we are facing. So we have to, I'm landing. So we have to go to the past. We have to do these corrections, the understatement of arrears that are paid outside the budget and all of those things. Those are some of the decisions that has to be put before the economic management team and before, cabinet and likely parliament.
I get you, but let me bring in Mr. Jackson. The fact that it appears going to the IMF for some support is back on the table. Is it good news? Is it a very formidable option we should be considering seriously?
Obviously, it is an option. What do we do? Our credibility is not good. And the reason why the Cedi has, some of us believe that the reason why the Cedi has taken a dive is because foreign holders of Cedis have dumped it. You've got to restore that credibility. That is one of the things. Remember that we're not talking about a sudden jump in demand for goods and services that has caused the Cedi to dive. We're talking about a dumping by these foreign bondholders who are holding Cedi paper. So very simply, fix your credibility.
This fixing of the credibility, can't it be done without the IMF?
The IMF is one realistic way of fixing your credibility. The other way of fixing your credibility is taking an axe to your expenditure. Then you've got to also show that you're raising enough revenue even to handle the debts that you already have. Our situation is dire. You've got to have credibility. You've got to cut expenditure.
If at first we're very clear in our minds that this is not an option for us, and now it looks like it's a partial option, or we are even considering it, or a combination of both. For you, should we then boldly go for the IMF, or on the other side, look to our own possible, as Secretary Penko called it in times past, homegrown solutions, which will give us similar or may push and give us similar credibility? Can we do it on our own without the IMF? Because it appears it is a major plank of this conversation.
Very simply, you've got to restore credibility. We cannot do it on our own. You can have all manner of solutions that you can proffer, but you can't have a solution that offers the credibility the IMF confers. I truly believe that the way we are going will end up with the IMF. That's what I believe. I don't think there are enough options on the table that can give us a way out. If there is, I would definitely love to look at it. But from where I sit, I see us going to the IMF, and I see nothing wrong with that at the moment.
Counter potent option. Yes, sir.
Sorry, Raymond, you have to come again.
Yeah, Mr. Jackson, I was asking whether the e-levy was a counter potent option.
Please, let's be clear. The e-levy has to be a red herring. I'm an advocate for the e-levy simply because I feel the situation is so dire that we need the e-levy. But how much is the e-levy going to give us? At best, 7 billion. I don't even believe it will bring 7 billion.
Okay.
I think the backlash, if the e-levy is implemented, will result in maybe anything up to a 50% reduction in the revenues they're expecting. In any case, look at all the other countries where this sort of levy has been introduced. Nobody has met the targets it had before it was introduced. The e-levy is not a magic bullet. Our problems are over and beyond the e-levy. But the e-levy is just one in the arsenal of solutions that we have to proffer. Every single peso counts, so the e-levy does count. But the e-levy is not a single bullet, a silver bullet.
There are several ones that has also been introduced recently. We've cut back on 20% of expenditure. At least that's what's been promised us. The expectation, and some are even suggesting we should do the entire year, not in the first quarter, that we'll cut back on expenditure. For somebody like Pops out there, we should actually get those in the executive and Article 71 agreeing to cut back on their pay or salaries by, let's say, some 25%. Those suggestions are also on the table. Is a general reduction in our expenditure the best way to go?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, you're broke. You're spending more than you earn. What do? You cut expenditure and you try and raise new revenue resources. It's not a complicated solution. It's that simple. So cut, and listen, cutting 20% cut only this quarter won't solve the problem.
Okay.
It has to be a whole year's cut. It has to be done realistically. And some of the flagship items will have to be looked at very carefully.
Like what? Because two people have suggested, Mr. Tekpe and also Professor Adair are suggesting is free SHS.
Free SHS. That's the elephant in the room. You got to look at it again. You got to look at the programs that when you cut will make a difference. You've got to look at all the other items that are on that budget that do not listen.
But is that not politically suicidal?
Well, the way I see it, if we allow this current situation to run, that is equally political suicide.
Okay. Now, let me bring in Mr. Tekpe at this point. The options for reducing expenditure, you listed a couple of them. You also broached the idea of what we should do with free SHS and all of that. The thinking
it's not just free SHS.
Very much so.
Look at the entire compensation. All of those things. Yes, and of course,
compensation really is about people's salaries. Really.
Yes, it is. Yes, certainly is. Yeah. It is a problem for you. And remember, this is not the first government to have problems with compensation. We had, if a single spine, what did we do? We had a national forum on it, and we went to who? We went to Cedi, we went to other places, and we sat down with labor and negotiated the repayment of the arrears and others that has to be done. And so, yes, if there's a problem with anything, it shouldn't be untouchable. That is it. Raymond, go back. One of the reasons we said we don't want to go back to the IMF is that we have done 18, 17, 19 programs. Go back to all of those programs and tell me which of them ever took 3 months for us to resolve our crisis. From burning of, from bushfires to drought, which of them took 3 months? It's a minimum of 3 years.
Okay.
Right? And by the way, cutting 20%, you know, in the first quarter, do you even have the money to pay that 20%? Right? Because one, you haven't been able to go to the market last year to get an additional 2 billion, which is part of the problem for the city, because we use some of that to support, you know, the budgets, you know, in addition to cocoa and the rest, right? 2, you have not been able to get your e-levy in place. 3, we know that the first quarter is often the toughest. You know, so the budget as it stands now, that 20% is the element of other recurrent expenditure other than compensation and interest, is the element of capital, apart from what, you know, will be paid as arrears, and then which has to be suspended and has always been suspended in the first quarter until revenue begins to pick up. You just do the necessary. So for me, there's nothing new about suspending 20%. It is something which has always been done by any finance minister, right? Structurally, it has always been done. Let me also just touch on, you know, 2 of the issues that were raised. You see, the test of going to the IMF is not when times are good for you. It's not when you have 3 oil fields, right? You come into office, you have 3 oil fields. It's not when you have ESLA, which, by the way, by 2025 will give you 40 billion, you know, 43 billion Ghana cedis. Why have you been able to use that to resolve, you know, the amount that is owed to depositors and the rest? It is not when you have, you know, 200 million sitting cool and you use it to take off the rest of the Kufuor bond. No, the resilience in going to the IMF is when you had, you know, crisis. And the first crisis that came after the exit, even after we took 250 million from the stabilization fund, which was not boosted anyway, the cap was never removed, you know, from 2015. The first crisis that hit us after taking 250 million, and by the way, we have taken nearly 380 million from the stabilization fund to date to tackle COVID, was COVID. And immediately with all these resources that you have, there has never been any government that had its own resources of 350 million, let alone no external assistance ever came specifically for any crisis. Call it global financial crisis, crude oil price falls and the rest. There was a cool 380 million we took for the stabilization fund. Yet still, it was not sufficient, and we dashed immediately among the first to go to the IMF. Same IMF we had exited. The red flag started back then to get 1 billion, which, as I said, we dedicated exclusively and entirely to the budget and left Bank of Ghana. You know, the city would have been stronger if that money had gone to Bank of Ghana. SDR, we've taken part of it. We gave some to Bank of Ghana. Yes, check the budget. So we are saying that the fiscal is a problem. Expenditure, a lot is being thrown at expenditure. It's not just one expenditure, right? Yes, it's not politically correct to touch free SHS. But remember, under the progressively free SHS, President Mahama said, we are stopping the construction of 200 schools going into an election. We are going to finish 50 or 80, and we are going to, you know, tackle 120, and should we win, then we will come back to it. This was a major political promise, and free SHS was an issue. But this was a leader who saw that we had a problem.
Finally,
you know,
gentlemen.
So it was not untouchable. So let's not create the impression that, you know, the free SH legacy is for just one administration. It was for both administrations.
Okay,
so
but
if
finally,
you are unable to touch
forgive me. I need to wrap up because I have basically the last few minutes to end this conversation. It's about the fuel crisis on our hands. If I speak to you directly, Mr. Jackson, how do we fix this fuel crisis in a matter of a minute or two?
Well, first of all, you got to understand that the fuel crisis is one of two things: an increase in the price of oil on the global market and a dive in the city. The quickest way to fix your fuel crisis is to fix your dive in the city, if you can.
Okay. Well, that's important to note. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Also, Mr. Tekpe, I mean, you've been finance minister before. You acted as also power minister along the line. How do we deal with this problem of the fuel crisis as urgent as yesterday?
We were dealing with it with subsidy. But like many things, we said there is something structural that needs to be done. Just as we said, sinking fund, we have to do something about debt. You know, stabilization fund, budget buffer. We said, let us take the subsidy element, part of the subsidy element of the ESLA, and start a strategic stock policy with South Africa, the US, and the US today is thinking about releasing strategic stocks, you know, to resolve the same fuel prices that we are talking about. That is mighty United States. We started, it was one of the reasons, you know, we stopped, we saw petrol queues being stopped. 2017, that policy measure was stopped. Those are some of the structural measures other countries have used and which we have to use. So like the sinking fund, which was paid lip service, you know, like the stabilization fund, which despite 3 oil fields was never increased for us, you know, to meet even the next crisis, the strategic stock was also stopped, right? So we are saying that, yes, today we don't have the subsidy, right? Because the budget hasn't got any room for subsidy. ESLA has been pledged. And so the subsidy element of ESLA is not coming, it's not going to come. And that is why, you know, the liberalization is going to the fullest extent and is being passed on to the consumer. Let us return to not just temporary solutions, but to structural solutions for our problems, so that we must anticipate the next crisis and know that we need the stabilization fund. We must anticipate the fact that we are going to be borrowing like every country, and therefore we need a sinking fund. We must appreciate that, you know, if we want to boost non-traditional exports, you need credit, export credit, and you need export guarantee. And let us stop, you know, let us give the Exim Bank, you know, the structure that it was meant or the goal that it was supposed to set. These are some of the structural measures that you need to change the direction for the economy.
Mr. Tekpe, there's a final question I'm asking you. Should we remove some of the taxes from ESLA today?
What is the option? Remember, you have pledged the ESLA revenue. And so if you are going to remove any taxes, remember that you have pledged it to support the ESLA bond, which has been extended from 3, 5 years to 10 years, 7 years and 10 years. So are you cutting a default? That is the reason some of those levies cannot be removed, because they are the ones that are supporting the repayment for the ESLA bond, which should have been paid in cash to the banks as we started with the VRA debt. And by now we could have finished, you know, paying the depositors, right? Despite the banking crisis that it has brought in and all. What happened when we took the loan for ESLA, using ESLA? What happened to that? Why didn't we use it to apply it immediately? So I'm telling you that the money, you know, which goes into some of those funds and the rest is supporting the debt, you know, the loan that was taken. And it may not be available, you know, for us to remove.
I am grateful to you. And gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on Upfront today. Thank you so much for your time on this show. And we should be having more conversations about which way forward after Cabinet completes that particular important meeting pretty soon.